Hi, welcome. This is the Alchemy of Alignment. I'm your host, Suzy Sanders, and thank you for being here with us again today as we continue to explore our journey and relationship with purpose, which I'm sure you know is one of my favorite topics. And I am really privileged today because we've got a really wonderful guest here to explore purpose with us. So before I introduce Leyla, I do want to express my gratitude to you for being here, involved in this conversation. And I also want to say thank you to D-Type, who are this season's podcast sponsors, and they are supporting us in keeping these conversations flowing. So I'm really delighted. I've got Leyla here in the Zoom room, and I'm going to ask her to introduce herself in a little bit more detail. But I feel quite privileged because Leyla is not only a TEDx speaker, she's a podcast award-winning podcast host. So I don't know if you can pick up a bit of nervousness from me today, but Leyla does some truly remarkable work through training, coaching, mentoring to support healthy and inclusive workplaces. So Leyla, thank you so much for making it the space to chat with me today.
It's an honor. It's a real honor to be on your show. I love to be on people's podcasts that there is alignment, and I love the name of your podcast, The Alchemy of Alignment. So nowhere else I'd rather be right now, Suzy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Leyla. And I would love to hear in your words a little bit more about where you spend your time and focus and what impact you make. And then we're going to dive in to talk about what purpose means to you. So, yeah, where do you spend your focus at the moment?
Yeah, great question. So, I have my business, Diverse Minds, and UK Limited is the official title. And Diverse Minds was born out of, I never thought I'd have my own business, right? So it was born out of me when I was working at Imperial College London as the head of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Centre. I was very fortunate because I had a bit of a carte blanche, a lot of license, especially compared to my colleagues and other institutions, to kind of do what I wanted. And one of those key bits of work was to think about well-being and mental well-being for staff and aligning it with the way in which mental well-being was talked about in the student space. So I trained as a mental health first aid instructor in 2013, so it was 10 years in May this year, and I started rolling out the programs. I did 2 pilot courses, one 8 people came to, one 9 people came to get my sign off, and then from then the courses were totally booked up. And then people started coming to me and saying, "Oh, you've done this at Imperial. Can you do it for us?" And it kind of grew. And I thought, "Oh, it's interesting." Went to my manager and she said, "Oh, well, you can do this, but the money has to go into the departmental budget." Sure, no problem. Would spend it on away days. And then I thought, "Oh, this is interesting. There's clearly something in this." And then I bought annual leave, and then eventually I left. But that wasn't overnight. That was a kind of 18-month process. So given that that's where it started from, my focus is on non-clinical mental well-being in the workplace. So how do we spot the signs, have proactive conversations, have proactive measures and reactive measures if we need them, and race equity. So how do we talk and think about anti-racism, how the fact that white dominant culture is sewn into the everyday, and the bit where they meet in the middle, which is how do we think about and how can we think about mental health and well-being practices through a cultural lens. So those are the 3 key areas of focus, and it's taken a lot of whittling down because initially I just took my job, which was really, really big, and thought, right, I'll run a business of it. But as we know, when you run a business, it's not very clear. When you're in an organization, you can do everything for everyone because that's what people like and that's what organizations want you to do. When you work for yourself, you have to switch your mindset because, of course, then the message isn't clear. So that's been an interesting one.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad I asked you to explain that because it's I love hearing about people's journeys and how things come together. And you're so right, that shift from kind of employee to entrepreneur is massive in so many ways. And so what's the purpose, Leyla? What does purpose mean to you? If we can start there.
Yeah, and it's a great question and it's a great word. And I think we see these words, don't we? Purpose, authenticity, values all the time. People talk about them all the time. But do we really take a moment to step back and think about A, the dictionary definition, but B, what they mean to us? And I think this is why this question is so powerful. And of course, we think of words like purpose, authenticity, values as good, positive words. But of course, people's purpose, authenticity, and values can be different. We may not see them as quote unquote good or positive or helpful. And I think if we think about sort of global, particularly in the global north, political leadership, it feels very misaligned from citizen requests and needs. So if we go back to the question you've asked me, my purpose, I think one of the reasons for starting the business is that I just didn't want people to go through what I had been through. So my role previous to working at Imperial College was in Oxford, and it was specifically focused on race equity. And it was really, really challenging. And it wasn't challenging because the work was hard. Of course, it was hard, but the work was challenging. But it was very challenging because of the racism, the very subtle racism that I experienced. And I think one of the things about purpose is that I don't see why people should or have to go through that. Now, that may be very utopian, and I also, from my work at Imperial College supporting disabled staff, I saw the amount of pain and anguish staff with all disabilities, visible, invisible, mental, physical, went through when that didn't need to be the case. So while in and of itself, we have to think about systemic change around accessibility and the language around disability and the provision and support from health and social care and in the workplace, also when disabled staff make requests, it's not complicated and it's not difficult. And I saw managers and people making it very, very difficult. And I still see those conversations happening today. So the purpose is always about how do we find practical, simple answers to empower people. And we know, and I think the other thing that really shocks me is that we are in an age where we have never had so much information at our fingertips. Now, it's not all good information, it's not all high quality information, it's not always the best information. However, if we can take the time to sift through that, we have information in an instant, which we've never really had before. It's grown and grown in the last 10, 15 years. So why is it that at work people are at their wits' end, their breaking point, like I've never seen before, and I'm not even internal anymore? So I think the purpose for me is like, let's use a common sense approach to improve people's lives. Start your behavior change journey and flipping well, finish it. This is the thing. Stop going over here. Now we're over here. Now we're over here. No, start your behavior change journey and finish it.
Oh, I felt the power in that. Start and finish it, right? And so many important points you've touched on there. And it's funny, isn't it? I think I'm noticing some threads with the conversations that I know I've been having recently, whether it be here or in other contexts, but that information overload and the pace, I think, of the world is definitely something I've felt recently. And what a remarkable purpose that you're working to. And I know your business has huge impacts and facilitates that. And I don't, my personal observation and belief that when you're kind of trying to support others to avoid situations that you've been in that weren't favorable to you, I think that's the most admirable, purest and kindest intention almost. Would you agree?
So that's really kind, and it's really lovely that you say that. But equally, I feel like I absolutely accept that kindness, but I do make money from it. So it's not purely from the goodness of my heart, right? This is interesting. I mean, equally, I didn't go into my business thinking I'm going to make tons of money from this. I just thought, oh, people are asking me for this. There must be something in this. And actually, if I can make this minimum to cover my costs, then that's really interesting. But I do also try, I mean, it's been a bit of a lull in my personal life, but from sixth form, actually, I used to be part of the amnesty group, and I've always been apart from the last 6 years, but I've always been part of a local amnesty group. I trained as a trainer with amnesty. So I always try and do things that are, you know, I'm not saying I get it right. I'm not saying it's perfect, but trying to align myself with things that are about systemic change and to make small differences. And um, yeah, and so I feel like there's the purpose professionally, and then there's a purpose personally, and the bits where they overlap. But equally, I think it's really important for me to be honest and say, well, I am making a living out of it. So it's not purely from the goodness of my own heart.
Oh, absolutely. And the link between purpose and payment, isn't that interesting? And I think, I don't know, for me, I relate that to the link. Perhaps it's an element of the jump from employee to entrepreneur as well. Because I mean, money's a hot topic.
Yeah.
And it's part of the puzzle, isn't it? But the link between payment and purpose is an interesting one. And yeah, we have to make money, right? The world, we all need money. That's part of it. So to be able to fulfill your purpose and make a living from it, then that's the goal. So what's the future holding for you? What's you talk about the overlap between your personal purpose, your professional purpose, systematic change. What's the big vision for you, if you don't mind me asking, Leyla?
No, it's a really great question. And again, I think that that's been a very difficult one. I think if you'd asked me that question before the pandemic, it would have been very clear. And then actually to kind of process that, I did some work with an arts therapist and we started doing collages. And I did this collage about my life before, how I felt about my life before the pandemic and then now. And it was, the one before was very clear, it was very bright. And then the one that I did was kind of me on a really choppy sea, and some doves pointing towards well-being. So I think it's interesting how people's purpose and values and vision has really changed from 2020. And it feels like 10 years, but it also feels like 2 minutes. And we all feel like we've lost this huge chunk of time. And I think based on the experience of doing collages, one of the things that I did was to train is using collage and coaching with the brilliant Andrea Watts. So she runs Coaching for Collage TM technique. So definitely see more coaching with collage in my future. And then the two big areas that I'm focusing on for the rest of the year and into 2024 is around race reciprocal mentoring programs. So that whole point around start your behavior change journey and finish it. So people talk about traditional mentoring where you have someone senior and someone junior, reverse mentoring where you have someone more junior mentoring someone more senior, but reciprocal mentoring, and I'm not saying again you have to do a lot of work around it, is to create, they may be junior and senior, different roles, but is to create a relationship where there is mutual understanding in that time and space that you meet to understand racial experiences. And it's of both people. So it's usually with someone from a white dominant culture and someone from a global majority Black diaspora culture, and to understand the barriers and to make changes in the workplace. And by doing it through one relationship at a time, obviously there's groups of people, so you might have 12 pairs or 15 pairs or 16 pairs. We're trying to build that understanding. And actually, when I run these programs, what I think is so powerful about them is that people go, oh, wow, we have so much in common, because that's the thing, right? As Joe Cox Foundation will say, more in common, and that comes out. So that's one really key area. And then the other key area is I've put together for World Mental Health Day on the 10th of October, a white paper on using inclusive language when we're talking about mental health and well-being in the workplace. And that's a free resource, and I really want people to tap into it and use it. There'll be a lot of things that people know, but sometimes it's useful. You know, one of the things I always get asked is, oh, I'm so scared of saying the wrong thing. What do we do? What do we say? And we don't always know what to say. We all know what hate speech is, whether it be race, religion, around LGBT and QI plus and sexual orientation. But we may slip up and we may make mistakes, and I make mistakes, and I've made lots of mistakes. But how do we come back from that? And I think the more fearful we are, we know, we know what poor and bad language is, but the more fearful we are of saying the wrong thing and we don't say it, we're actually making situations worse. So I think those are the kind of key areas at the moment. And actually, one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is that I plan less, which is interesting because, Suzy, you know me, you've known me for a number of years, and I would call myself a real, planner. I love to plan, and now I've just had to let go of all that. And I think it's interesting, and I say this with no malice, I say this positively, but because we shouldn't have to be doing this, but we are having to do this in the country at the moment. People striking, hats off to them, but it does mean sometimes you'll arrange something and you can't go, you can't do something. So I have gone from being someone who cannot let go to someone going, all right, cool, like we can see. I might book a train ticket, I might not, I don't know. I'll put it in the diary, I'll pencil, everything's penciled in. So that's interesting. So then in terms of, I guess, purpose, it's around seeing what opens up, around letting go, seeing what might happen, seeing the possibilities as opposed to desperately trying to control things, which I spent so long doing in my life.
Oh, Leyla, thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, there's so many things that I want to kind of pinpoint there from what you've said. I mean, the coaching and through collage sounds fascinating. And thank you for sharing your experiences. I mean, we keep going on about it, don't we? But the pandemic changed everything. I will put my hands up, I'm still processing it in so many ways. And you know, I have had the privilege of knowing you for many years, and yeah, I can definitely identify and relate with what you're saying in the planning and control and all of that stuff. So I really find it really valuable to hear how you have tackled that. And yeah, the world is changing at such pace, isn't it? And I know I was an over. I'm going to say it, I was an over planner pre-pandemic, and one of the phrases I always like to remind myself of is like the breakdown before the breakthrough kind of thing. Like, it's okay. I'm gonna get to that pain of having to figure out what it is that I need to let go of before I can. But I'm going off on a tangent now. But those resources that you've mentioned, will make sure that we link, because I know the white paper, I mean, and the mentoring program. And you answered my question beautifully there, because I was poised ready to ask what the impact was of that you'd seen. And I think if I've interpreted it right, it's creating the space for understanding is part of it. And I know you will eloquently chip in with more there, but have I got that right? It's that space of mutual understanding and respect.
Yes, and before I talk more about the impact, I just want to say thank you for saying the breakdown before the breakthrough, because you know the word breakdown has very negative connotations, and of course it can be incredibly painful for people. And I'm not saying we want people to go through breakdowns, but it can be a kind of continuum, and we can have a breakdown in terms of sugar, everything I held true, I'm not sure it's true anymore, and how do I shift? And I think a very helpful term, Suzy, that I've come across in the last few months is ambiguous loss. So that we go through some kind of grief, and it may not be a grief of a bereavement grief that we're used to talking about, or that people think of when they think of grief, but daily little losses and things that really affect us, and we don't necessarily have the words for them, or we can't communicate that with people. And people are like, well, you know, no one's died, like what's wrong, or they might be thinking it. But this term ambiguous loss, and there's a really great group actually that I joined on Facebook, where people have had all sorts of sad and interesting and challenging things happen, and giving it a language. So I think that's really, and I think that's what we've had with the pandemic, that kind of processing of the ambiguous loss. So yeah, so firstly I wanted to say that, so thank you so much for saying that. And then secondly, going back to the race reciprocal mentoring, yes, you're absolutely right, that place for understanding. And also, again, I think it really comes back down to fear. You know, it's usually senior white individuals that are just terrified. So before you start a program, you have to have a really comprehensive training session with both groups separately. So, you know, 2 hours with one group, 2 hours with the global majority Black group, and with the senior mentors, they're just terrified. They're like, well, okay, can I have a script? What do I say? What do I do? And we actually have prepared these documents that breaks it down, you know, start of your mentoring journey, middle and end, the things you might like to ask. And it's a security blanket, because then when you have the midpoint check and they say, oh, I haven't used the document, and I say, great, because you don't really need it. I provide it because people panic, but you see, you don't really need it. But if you've taken one or two questions from there, great. And I think with the Black global majority group, it's how do you want to tell your story in a way that doesn't make you vulnerable? So there's sharing, but often people don't want to overshare, or they don't want to reveal everything, understandably, because they might have been punished for that in the workplace, or there's been misunderstandings. So I always say, you know, first of all, I'm going to give you a magic wand. What would you love to say? Now I'm going to put you in the real world, and I'm going to ask you, how do you want to share that story without making your private public, but sharing enough of yourself? So some of the things that I suggest that people do is, you know, pick a book, a poem, a TV series, a movie. If they're close by geographically, they can go see it together in the middle of their mentoring relationship. If they're doing it remotely, which many pairs do, you know, it can be cross-institutional or cross-workplace. And if they're split sites, then they might go away and watch a documentary program, whatever it is, share a poem and discuss that. And actually what that does is it's a really safe way to do cultural exchange, as opposed to going, oh, in your culture, you people, you do X. It's saying, here's a real poem that I hold important. Here's a poem that I hold really important. Let's read it. Let's see what we've gotten from that. And it's not an English class. So you know, and the poem might not be completely in English. It might be in various languages, you know, and how does that make you feel? What's coming up for you? What has it made you think about? But you can only do that when you've had the training and you've given people the net under them to kind of hold that relationship and given them the tools to do that. So I think that's it. And I think it goes back to more in common, it's kind of at the forefront of my mind, but that whole thing around we all, we all cry the same tears, we all bleed the same, everyone's blood is red. And we're not really that different. Yes, we've had different cultural experiences. There are different systemic advantages and disadvantages, and we need to be talking about that. But ultimately, we can usually find connection with someone at quite a deep level if we give space and opportunity to that.
Wow. And anyone that's listening going, how do I work with Leyla? Because I know I am hearing you talk about that. What's the best way for people to contact you to get more information about this?
Yeah, so I love to hear from people. So please, my website is diverseminds with an s.co.uk. You can check out my podcast, Diverse Minds Podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast from. Email me, it's Leyla, spelt Leyla, at diverseminds, all one word, .co.uk. And yeah, and I have lots of free resources. You can join my mailing list. But yeah, just get in touch. Love to hear from people and their blogs and podcasts. If you want to get a flavor of the way I work, then you're very welcome to go and have a look at those free resources as well.
Thank you, Leyla. And I remember, and my relationship with time is definitely one of the things that's changed since all of those lockdowns. It feels like it was only yesterday, but I remember when your podcast started. And how many episodes are you up to now?
So I think this week is 216. So yeah, it's one a week. So yeah, it's been going since September 2019. I'm lucky I got in there actually before the pandemic because of course many people's pandemic project was podcast, but we know it's difficult. It's hard. It's not it's very exciting doing podcasts, but to kind of stick with it is another game, isn't it? But yeah, so that's
Yeah,
where we are.
it is another game. Consistency is key,
Yeah.
and you've achieved that. And how what's the podcast in how does that play into your purpose then?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons for setting up a podcast, again, everything I do is twofold, right? So the first one was because I don't love blogging. And at the time, Susie, kind of, you're a bit ahead of me, but when we set up our businesses, blogging was still really popular and it still is. And if you're a really good writer, then, absolutely go for it. But I did a year's worth of blogs and I found it exhausting. And I just thought, oh, flipping heck, I'm much better with spoken word. I'm much better, a public speaker. So, I started doing podcasting. And one of the things about the podcast was to amplify and give a voice to people who don't normally get the opportunity to speak. So, we both know that unless you're a celebrity, you don't get 10,000 downloads a week, but that doesn't mean there's still the opportunity to amplify people's voices and to find people that could speak about things. And I'm very lucky to have a really broad range of friends and colleagues and amplify Black, global majority, and diaspora voices. So that's one of the key purposes of it. And to have conversations that maybe people might be having, I'm sure they are having, but to get some of those conversations in the domain and to think about how can I use this knowledge in the workplace? Because then we go back to systemic change, start your behavior change journey and flipping well, finish it.
We've got to get that on a quote card. But and I love your recognition of your strengths. And we all know as business owners we have to market, we have to sell, we have to put ourselves out there. And the fact that you've found your way of really doing that is commendable, because that journey is a journey, isn't it? And I'm dying to ask, the TEDx talk, how was that? Because that's a process in itself, is my understanding.
Yeah. So the TEDx is interesting actually because I was at a dinner table and my uncle was there and he irritates the hell out of me, one of my uncles, and he really, really upsets me. And I just was like, I can't. So I picked up my phone and I started scrolling through and I saw an advert from a very well-known TEDx coach. I thought, oh yeah, this is the year. This is the year I'm going to do a TEDx. So I started filling in this form to have a call with this person. And I didn't like the way they did things at all. So I didn't go with them. But I found someone great, Minnie von Mallencroft Grant, and actually I'd seen her in the Women Who book. So the year that I won the award, you get the free book that Sandra Garlick puts together. And I thought, oh, that lady, I must contact her. And I did, and it was a really good fit, and we worked on it together. But before that, I started looking at TEDx talks and where I could do it. And actually, I was lucky. I got the first one I applied for, which is TEDx Wolverhampton. And it's something I'd wanted to do for ages, actually. But it is, yes, it is a real process because, of course, you've got the application, then you've got all the work to do with writing the script. You have to submit the script for approval because it has to be accurate. If you use stats, you have to put all your facts and figures in. And then if you haven't done high school, secondary school drama for years, which was definitely me, you forget how to learn lines. And so it was a case of I recorded it, I'd walk around the park, I'd learn and learn and learn, I'd keep reading the script. So yeah, it was a real process. And I think one of the hardest things actually was when we had the first rehearsal, and I started. I hadn't learned it all, so I still had the script, and I started talking, and I burst into tears, and I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And they were so supportive, brilliant. Claire Roberts Malloy, she said, no, it's okay, Leyla. She came down with a tissue. And she said, it's okay, it's all right. You know, if on the day you feel that way, don't worry, just let it come. People can see it's real. And I just thought, oh, how am I going to do this? But actually, on the day, it was all right because what happened was you can't really see anyone. The lights are so bright. But there was a lovely woman in the audience who I spoke to afterwards, and she had this beautiful green dress on, and it had beautiful print flowers. And I just thought, if I get upset, I'm focusing on those flowers. So that's what I did. And I could see my husband was in the corner, and he wears really bright trainers, and he had these really bright laces. And I was like, don't look at him. But if you feel yourself slipping, look at the luminous green laces. So there was something having grounding tools, and the brilliant Aurea Race, who was before me, she did have an emotional moment at the end. Hers was very, very emotional about healing letters, and the relationship with her mother. So do check out her TEDx talk. And she came out and we hugged, and then I went on the stage. So it was okay. But yes, it's a real process, and it takes over your life for 3 months. But what's been interesting, Suzy, about the TEDx talk is I thought it was going to bring in lots of work. I thought I was going to really it was definitely part of the purpose, but it hasn't actually done that. I think people watch TEDx talk silently. I don't think you hear from people. There are a couple of narky, bordering on inappropriate comments on YouTube about it, but it is what it is, and I wouldn't regret a minute of it. But I think that everyone's TEDx journey, you do the talk, and then almost when it goes online, that's when it becomes live. It's quite interesting because that's when the world can see it, because the TEDx audience are brilliant. They're not going to insult you. They're really supportive. But yeah, it's again, it's an interesting 360 process that still continues because you're promoting the TEDx talk, but it is not. I don't think it's given me the kind of, for me, for others, it's different, the kind of boost that I thought it would. And I think some of that's around timing. And I think some of it is around people are tired of talking about race and racism at work. They want to move on when they've not even started the work. But yeah, interesting. So big process and big emotions.
Mm. Oh, Leyla, thank you. Because to hear your experience with it is really insightful and really valuable, because my understanding is quite limited, but I knew it was a process. And to hear you talking about your grounding tools, then I don't think I've got it in me to be able to do that. And I've seen your TED talk, and you're sharing your lived experience, and it's infused with so much research and data as well. And I applaud you. I really do, because I don't think I've got it in me to be able to handle that. And yeah, so thank you for doing it.
I think, Suzy, I just want to say you absolutely would be able to do it. And I think you'd be brilliant. And I think that you could choose something that is less emotional or more emotional, depending on what it is, the message that you want to get out there. So please, I think I've seen, I was talking to a friend about this. I've seen some awful speeches at the various party conferences this year, and I won't name individuals, but truly awful. And I said to one of my friends, I said, wow, can you imagine we could get anyone off the street and give them the coaching that these political leaders have had, and they'd be amazing. And I said, can you imagine if we'd had this coaching, we'd be so good. So I just think, remember that if you watch some political leaders and they're not good speeches, they're not great. I think this year has been terrible. So I think, if they can do it and they do it badly and they get applauded, then anyone can do it with a bit of good coaching and they will be brilliant.
Oh, yeah, you're the power of coaching. And you know me, Leyla, if I was doing it, it would probably be I'm all about the feels. It would be something very emotive to me anyway. But thank you for sharing that part of your journey with us. And oh gosh, where should we go next? Where should we go next? I knew this was going to be a really insightful conversation, but we've talked about what's led your business to its creation, and we've touched on the pandemic and the timelines and the future and your purpose through the work that you do. And I mean, that was a really terrible summary when I think of where we've gone,
It was
where
really
we've gone
helpful.
in
No,
this
I think it's really
conversation.
helpful.
But I suppose for you as a person, if we've talked about the kind of creating a business and align and making sure it's aligned, but from a business perspective, is there any advice that you would offer someone who perhaps was not feeling as connected to their purpose as they could be?
Yeah, so I think that I guess there's a few things. I think that it's about finding, first of all, if you don't want to spend loads of money, which I totally understand, or you don't, you're really self-funding, is to use a tool or some tools that you can find for free online to help you align with your purpose, to think about that. And also there's that's very cerebral, so it's getting a pen and paper or doing it on how if you type. Okay, and then I think it's to get out of your head and to find ways to help you. So obviously I'm going to say collage, and there's different ways to do collage. There's vision boarding where you're being very purposeful and finding things. But there's also, this is the coaching collage TM method that Andrea has trademarked and that she teaches. And it is about how you gather and collect information, and you look at images that call to you and you don't censor that, and then you put it together in a particular way. There's also having people that you trust, whether that's relatives and friends and whoever it is, to feed back some things to you. So I think that often people just want to start businesses because they think they can be rich quickly. And it does happen for some people. I'm not denying that. But I think if you do that, it makes it difficult and it can become like a job. Whereas I think for most of us as entrepreneurs, there are times that are difficult and challenging and exhausting, but it doesn't really feel like a job because it's so aligned with purpose, and we're not corralled in the same way that we have, or have been or could be in a job. So, and that's not also to say that you might have your business 2 days a week and have a job 3 days a week. There's no rules, hard and fast rules around it. And I think often we think that we have to be this or this when it can be this and this. And this is something, two things, two, three, four, five, six things can be true at the same time, but that doesn't mean they all align. So it can be different sort of truths that sit in different places. So think about that. Think about the things that can be true at the same time. Think about the cerebral way of doing things. Think about creative ways of doing things, whatever creative means to you. And then I think also if you have got a little bit of money, or if someone can support you with that, and there's free resources actually. Sorry, the other thing I should say is in your local area, there should be your local economic partnership or your chamber of commerce. Can you go and find out if there are any free mentoring resources? There are lots of free business mentoring spaces actually. So that's the other thing that you could get for free. And also if you have got a little bit of money, maybe book in some time with a specific business coach, have a couple of sessions to help you with that purpose side of things.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad I asked that question, Leyla. So much value there. And again, it's a continual process, isn't it? I know I've really relished in having these kind of big conversations about purpose and alignment, and there's lots of talk. My experience, there's a lot of talk of vision and values in businesses, and to me, and mission as well. And to me, it's the purpose that underpins all of that. That's the foundational part of it. And when you are, particularly if you're a startup or a solo entrepreneur, you've got all the spinning plates, you've got all the hats to wear. And I think I know through my own experience, I have not made the space and time to reconnect back into myself as much as I should have. And I know that I have the information overload, the quality and the speed and the pace of information that we have these days has definitely hindered me in many ways. So some really solid advice there, Leyla. Thank you. And if I can ask one last question of you, because you've been so generous with your time and your insights, I'm going to ask you to repeat the start your journey and flipping well, finish it thing, because I want you to voice that if you may, and again, advice to someone who's like, okay, what do I do? How do I start my journey and finish it, in the context of your work?
Okay, so yeah, so
you
start your behavior change journey and flipping well, finish it. So I think if people are, I guess the departments I usually work with will be learning and development, equality and diversity, or diversity, inclusion and belonging, however it's phrased, and HR. So I think it's about using the information you have. So firstly, I think people are very tempted to create more and more data sources. And yes, your staff survey may be a couple of years out of date, or maybe you don't have information that was done yesterday, but you probably have enough information. So staff survey, I mean, this is part of the bigger picture: recruitment stats, retention stats, progression stats. The general mood and atmosphere, if you can read that, if you're not face to face, that is more difficult, but people have a sense of it. And then look at where you want to get to. So looking at where you are now, using those sources you already have, what's the ideal? So just forget about what's possible and what's perfect or what's realistic, not perfect, what's realistic, and really think about, if we had a utopia, if we had that magic wand, what would we like? How would we like things to be? What differences would we like? What might we keep the same? Okay, then you look at the gap and think, right, we've got this gap between where we are now, where we want to be, qualitative, quantitative. And so what do we need to start plugging those gaps, and know that it's not going to be overnight, and know that some things you are going to have to invest in capital costs, and some things are going to pay dividends quicker than other things. And that could be dividends in terms of fewer employment tribunal cases, hopefully. Hopefully you don't want any, but it happens, especially at the moment where people feel really treated very unfairly in many situations. But also things like happiness at work, cohesiveness, fewer people, the turnover might go up and then it might go down. Think about your reviews on Glassdoor. There are quite a lot of indicators that your organizations can use, particularly larger ones. And then think about that plan. You want your 12 months, 3 years, and 5 years. And it's not saying you have to keep pouring money into it, but you are going to have to invest in the capital costs initially to then help you. And you need to get experts in, and you need to get people in, and you need to think about the team and what that looks like. And I think that's where people get stuck. They do a sort of 6-month plan and think it's done, and it's not done. And that will include policies, procedures, but it's the hard stuff, it's the behavioral, it's the conversations, it's making it fun, and it's making it interesting as well.
Thank you so much, Leyla. Thank you so much. And I'm going to draw our conclusion to our conversation today. It's been a joy to sit here with you and hear your experiences. So thank you, Leyla, for being here. And thank you for listening, because we are here to talk about purpose. And I am always blown away with where these conversations go. So I want to hear what you make of this episode and what things you've taken from it, because I trust you've taken what you needed. So thank you for being here for another episode of The Alchemy of Alignment. I'm Suzy Sanders. I'm the founder of Alchemy Virtual Assistants, and I am so proud and privileged to bring you this podcast on purpose. I'll catch you soon.